So I kind of like this quote really because it's just a reminder of, how gender and sexuality, and particularly sexuality, have evolved over time, and the meaning we've really given to them. That whether we've seen it as an activity, or whether we've seen it as an instinct, or whether we actually focus on what is the object of sexuality. And if we go back in time, even to kind of the ancient Greeks, they didn't really have distinguishing words, for example, for being gay. It was an activity that people would have sex with either gender, but there wasn't a label. It wasn't actually an identity, and it was perfectly acceptable. And then, of course, we go through various other periods in history where the mind, the soul, there was this sense of puritanism that came in terms of sex was something that needed to be withheld, to be controlled, because for the sake of the soul. And also the period, of course, where it kind of seemed to evolve then, of course, into the science model, into the medical model, into the church. So there's a lot which, we don't have time, of course, to kind of go through the whole history, but it's very interesting to really just watch the evolution from something which is an activity, from something then which Freud saw as an instinct, and then post-Freud, how that became something to be studied by scientists, and then took on a value and became part of morality. And of course, throughout Western history, the church, of course, has played a very big part in terms of the label of morality over sexual activity of all kinds, and where really a value system was established between good sex and not so good sex. And of course, how also that got convoluted with in terms of identity, people's identity, that if people practice a certain kind of sex, or if people use sex as a job or to earn money like prostitution, then it's in that category of bad sex.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of limitations. I mean, you have to remember that the church, which was the Catholic Church, which was so powerful throughout, hundreds of years, was really taking the view that this whole life was not so good. You had to focus on the next life. And so anything that was, about this life was kind of given, was given sort of the short list of things that were not so good. And sex is one of those things that will definitely get you to focus on this plane of existence. And so it was particularly limited and looked on as being kind of a negative thing, because it really would tear you away from your focus on the next life. But other things as well. I mean, you weren't really supposed to enjoy anything. The early church was really, really harsh with that stuff. So we kind of, got off on that track. And although I don't think that we would really take that much of it, to heart anymore, the impression of that has been very, very difficult to remove. And that has created a lot of limitations, so that in a sense we're not really focused on the next life anymore, but somehow or another we've somehow managed to, sex is still that thing that can cause it's much less than it used to be, but it still causes some discomfort. The fact that there doesn't really get studied that much in universities, the fact that we don't talk about it much in astrology, is really, really pretty remarkable, considering how much energy people really do put into this area of life.
Well, it's also that, when you think of other cultures that saw sex almost as an art, the art of sex, the desire, the whole, erotic desire, and how the influence of the church in the Western world to really squash that down, that really transmuted it into something that either it's good if it's for procreation within the institution of marriage, or it's something bad if it's just pure passion passion and enjoyment and desire. And the effects of that, then we think, looking at later on the LGBT community, because it's not sex for procreation, it's sex for desire. And so you see the connection between and the influence, really quite a destructive influence on that, where some of the cultures really maintained some of that really respect for the art of sex and the enjoyment of sex. So it doesn't feel quite as destructive as what we've had here in the Western world.
That's very true.
So this is just a list, just to kind of really explore how industrialization really made quite a difference in terms of course, the role of women, in terms of the role of gender, in terms of also the potential for marginalized sexual groups to really gather together and get strength from each other, and of course led to eventually things like Stonewall and the queer movement and so on, all of that. Freud, of course, we'll talk briefly about him, and Kinsey, the DSM, the manual, the effect of mental health, feminism, contraception. These are some of the things we've really picked out, standing out in terms of looking at the evolution over periods of time. And we're going to be looking at, of course, the transpersonal planets that are very connected with these times. Of course, there are plenty of other times, so don't feel that we're saying these are the only ones or the most important, but we just thought these were interesting to highlight.